Hello, travelers and tourists. My name is Mark, and I am the local disaster tour guide. That's right, I am a storyteller who has plenty of stories to share about how things went wrong for me as a storyteller. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder, and today I would like to welcome a special guest, RebelThenKing, to join me for a conversation about some of the lessons that we have learned in storytelling Pathfinder 2e. So, Rebel, would you like to introduce yourself?
I sure would, and boy, adventures, are there some lessons to be learned today. I'm RebelThenKing, similar to Mark on Local Disaster Tour Guide. I am not as much as a storyteller as much as a story player. I do a lot of playing, not quite as much GMing, and well, there have been some mistakes made along the way, and that's what we are going to talk about today. And I'm very excited to hear your lessons and also to tell you mine because these things are frustrating sometimes in the moment, but they're typically rather hilarious afterwards. So I'm looking forward to the discussion.
The best part of all of these stories is when it's over, you have the opportunity to look back and reflect, and most importantly, laugh at yourself. So, to give you all a heads up for what's going on, Rebel and I, we are doing a channel crossover where we are talking about our experiences in storytelling Pathfinder 2e. And in this video, we're going to talk about some of our stories of things that went wrong at the gaming table, why they went wrong, and what it taught us about storytelling in Pathfinder 2e. And then over on Rebel's channel, we're going to have the flip side of this conversation, and we're going to talk about the things that went right. Now, of course, before we dive into our stories, it is very important to remember that everybody has stories to share. So, for those of you who are listening to this video, be sure to join in the conversation and let us know what your stories are of where things went wrong so that we can all learn from our stories together. So, Rebel, are you ready to get into this?
I am delighted. Let's begin.
Alright, so the first story that I brought for what went wrong, and this is in many ways one of the most famous stories I have at my Pathfinder 2e table. I call this story Surprise, Severe Means Severe.
It sure does.
So, some context for this. Back when Pathfinder 1st Edition was transitioning to 2nd Edition, I was doing this big farewell to 1st Edition campaign for my players. I basically told my players, all options are open, make the craziest characters you can, throw them into a 1E game, and we're going to go crazy for our farewell to 1E, and we're going to run through a storyline together. And there was, or every year, usually around my birthday, I will do a special one-off game that has some kind of humorous context to it, and the gag of that year's game, as Pathfinder 2e had just come out, the Game Master, the evil version of myself, forced all of the characters to convert to Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and they had to fight to get back to Pathfinder 1st Edition so they could finish their story.
That's a wild concept.
And that was... It was a big, goofy game, and every year for my birthday we do something insane. But so for that particular session, they were going to be playing their characters in Pathfinder 2e for a single session. And so I went through and I did my best to translate all of their characters over using, at that time, just the core rulebook. And small nod to the quality of Pathfinder 2e, I got very good conversions on very wild 1st edition builds using just the core rulebook. That's almost a conversation by itself.
It's a versatile system. It's I've heard that there are technically possibly more character combinations than there are actually people in the world. So
Yes.
you can almost build anything you want, except for seemingly all the times you have a very specific character in mind and then can't actually do it. But
So, you know, all of this is setting up to a fun, goofy game like is normal for my table. But when I was running this game, I was running it in the mindset of a Pathfinder First Edition storyteller. And in Pathfinder First Edition, especially when you get to higher levels, player characters in that system are ridiculous. To the point that challenge rating in First Edition is almost meaningless. Routinely, when I ran that system, I would throw my players up against, I can't remember if the word used to be epic or extreme, but the highest level challenges that you could theoretically throw against your players, I would drop those like candy into my games, and because First Edition was so over the top, player characters could reasonably face them. So, when I was looking at Pathfinder 2e and preparing this one-shot game, I looked at their challenge design rules, and I said to myself, you know what, this is a one-shot, let's make this simple for my players. I'm going to do a low threat encounter, a moderate threat encounter, and a severe threat encounter, and I'm not even going to touch extreme. I'm sure they could handle extreme, but I'm not going to touch extreme. And then the TPK almost happened. So, the actual encounter itself was a bullet and some brown bears that I'd given some magical powers to. And, fairly simple creatures, fairly straightforward. And I remember in the very first turn of that one shot for Pathfinder 2e for the severe encounter, the party's war priest was down. Dying 3, very likely to lose his character. Like, it was terrible. People were crying. It went off the rails so fast.
I mean, what's the big deal? You just lose your healer in the early stages of combat. What else could go wrong after that?
So every time I think back to that story, and the number one piece of storytelling advice I give for people who want to run Pathfinder 2e is, when Paizo says severe, they mean severe. Coming over from First Edition, the word epic or extreme, I can't remember which one they used, but whatever word it was, that word didn't mean anything. You come over to Pathfinder 2e, like, I am very cautious about throwing severe at my players, and I let them know that severe is coming.
Mm-hmm.
So.
All right. Well, did everyone make it through in the end?
Yes.
Okay.
Thankfully, there was a druid in the party who was able to get the war priest up.
Get a secondary healer in there. I always recommend having a secondary healer, even if it's someone who just dabbles in potions or has, like, the psychic ability, restore the mind. I see used a lot. Something that can get that primary healer back on their feet. Yeah.
To the party's credit, they did pull it together. They did survive. A side conversation of that encounter, I never thought this would be true. In Pathfinder First Edition, I was sick to death of Attack of Opportunity because it happened so
all the
much.
Time.
And in Pathfinder 2e, they drastically reduced the existence of that. In that severe fight, I also discovered that you can miss having Attack of Opportunity, because that actually would have saved the War Priest.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, I feel like the lack of Attack of Opportunity is one of the most common stumbling points or misconceptions between systems. That just seems to be a great character, a player fear is, I don't want to go near that thing because it has Attack of Opportunity. And if you've played Second Edition long enough, you're thinking, I mean, it might, but chances are it doesn't. I'll just walk right by that bear. It'll be fine.
it has been fun seeing the change in descriptions for me as a storyteller, because I have a lot of players who've come from D&D or other systems, and they'll ask, "Will this provoke a reactive strike?" And I'll be like, "Maybe. Feeling lucky?" And
Yeah.
that has actually been a fun change in the system. But that encounter was my first true lesson from Pathfinder 2e. The first one shot I did, Paizo decided that the word severe actually means severe.
So that was your primary lesson, which is a good one. And did your players get anything out of that? Because players don't know the severity of an encounter unless you, the GM, tell them. Did that change once? I assume some of those same players from this 1e, 2e conversion continued on in 2e. Did you see a decided change in the way they approached encounters after that?
About half of that group didn't transition to 2e when that campaign
Okay.
ended, but that campaign ended because of COVID, so it kind of ended under weird circumstances.
Yeah.
The ones that did transition to 2e, I do think that they approach combat differently now because some of the assumptions of the game are different, and if you're not prepared for them, I do think they catch you off guard. There's one person, they didn't transition to 2e, but they're one of the people who dropped out when COVID was a big thing. Granted, now I would not say this, but I totally get why they said it then. They had the low threat encounter, the moderate, and then the severe threat encounter that almost TPK'd the party. And they were like, I don't know if I can play this system. It feels too much like a game of rocket tag.
Yeah. It can be. So how many, if you had to estimate, how many hit points did the party have collectively between them at the end of the encounter?
Okay, end of the encounter. Everyone was conscious, but most of them just barely.
Yeah.
I have a very large group. I had 7 players in that particular game. And I would say collectively it was probably about 80 hit points, but that is barely over 10 hit points a player. So
Right. And that was at a much later level, right?
Mhm.
You said, these aren't level 1 players where that's still half their hit points. That's they are one sniffle away from death at that point, huh? All right. Well, that is harrowing.
Mhm.
So, if you would allow me, I will regale you with a story of I'll show you the foreshadow the ending here. This is the only permanent character death that has been experienced in any of my campaigns. And it was due to what started as part of what seemed to be a pretty normal dungeon crawl.
Okay.
I don't want to give too much away in case anyone is playing through the adventure path right now, but when you're in a dungeon, right?
Mhm.
You're going room to room and you're getting different fun creatures in every one. And typically in dungeon crawls, at least I sort of get this somewhat sense of confidence because you're going room to room and they're usually moderate encounters and it's kind of set up to go and explore. And seemingly this was the same. It was a large number of enemies, but we are also a large party, a party of 7. So we didn't think much of it. And then there were some early warning signs, of course. The first thing was the enemies were all of the same type. They were sort of these magical undead priests.
Okay.
And they started intercepting damage. All damage. Didn't matter how much we would hit them. The GM would say, interesting. None of that damage went through. So that was quite frightening. Second, they were undead priests, so those who did end up taking damage would just get healed by their friends. Oh, and by the way, they're undead, so they cast the harm spell. So they would burst harm spell, heal their friends, and hurt us at the same time. And then third, we did actually land a good recall knowledge check on them to ask about any other abilities that we hadn't seen yet, and the GM said, sure, Um, when they die, they also emit a 3-action harm spell. So we realized if you're standing within, if I'm remembering, 30 feet of these things, 30 feet, which is cantrip range, you are going to get hurt even by killing them. So, for lack of a better word, at that point, we panicked and we started a very disorganized retreat. We had some people kind of saying we can plug up this hallway and we can fence them off. Others just said, we're running all the way out of this hallway, through the next room, out of the other hallway. We are getting as far away as possible. And that kind of led to the beginning of the end for us. Some of the characters did fully escape. And by fully escape, I mean they were rooms away from the rest of the party. Other characters got trapped. They were surrounded, at least one of them was, and couldn't get out. So what we had was a few characters fighting for their life to the death, surrounded, and other characters who were so far away that they actually skipped turns. You know, they would say, well, I guess I'll delay, or I guess I'll prepare an action if something comes through, but nothing would. So we had some people not even there to help out their allies anymore. We did what we could. I was playing as a bard. I was one of the characters not trapped, but I was, it was my character, an enemy, and then a trapped character. And it was our sorcerer who was trapped. She tried casting Sanctuary on herself, which was a great idea at that point. If you were surrounded, cast Sanctuary. Unfortunately, enough of the enemies made their will saves to overcome it, and were still able to do damage. We tried killing and clearing a path, but that didn't work. The sorcerer tried tumbling through, and it was a tough decision, but the rest of us just had to say, that's it. This sorcerer has 2 hit points left. Even if we kill one of these things, it will burst a harm spell and kill our sorcerer. Which, by the way, at this point, we hadn't taken a single one down yet. So that was it. We ran. And the rest of us escaped. And to the GM's credit, I don't know if they were preparing this ahead of time with the character who had died. I think they actually had, because if I remember, this is an encounter that bled over sessions. And they role-played a foreshadowing of what ended up being a boss later on, coming in to deal the final strike, to deal the final blow on the character. So we got a little foreshadow of what the big boss was that we hadn't seen yet. But yeah, we lost our sorcerer in that encounter. And it's the only time I've ever experienced an actual permanent character death like that.
That situations like that hurt. When you were describing the monster, I don't know if you would know this. Was it a monster from Book of the Dead?
I don't know for sure, but I think so.
Okay.
I mean,
I think I may know which monster you're describing, because I may be one of those evil storytellers who has dropped that exact monster on my players.
It was rough.
It
was rough.
Last year, I was doing a campaign set in the Gravelands where my players were refugees trying to escape the Whispering Tyrant. Mm-hmm. And in your description of those creatures, I'm like, oh, I think I know what he got thrown against. Those things are not nice.
It's not. It's it really made me respect clerics so much, because it was like, oh man, this is what it feels like to be an undead fighting clerics. It's just not even fair. They heal themselves and hurt you at the same time. Being on the other end of that was absolutely brutal and just very eye-opening.
Yeah, situations like that highlight how well designed heal and harm are in this game. Variable action spells and some of the creative uses of spellcasting that Paizo has put in, it stinks to be on the losing end of it. But it also, like, it makes clerics and other classes that can use those abilities feel like they have a really heavy punch. So
I completely agree. I really do like the cleric class overall. I feel like sometimes it's the unsung hero. It's not unsung. It's just that no one thinks much of the cleric until they're like, "Oh, pretty please heal me. Pretty please. I'm sorry I made fun of you for being weak and not hitting as hard as I do, but oh please heal me." And yeah, we didn't have one to help us out. Oh, I should have mentioned though, as part of this, which made it extra scary and bad, that sorcerer who did end up dying was our primary healer. Was a divine tradition. I forget exactly which bloodline, but was a divine tradition sorcerer who prepared heal and had a staff of heal and went. I also glossed over that. We went through all of our healing abilities. I have the Blessed One archetype, so I have Lay on Hands with my Bard. I was slapping everyone on the back with Lay on Hands with my multiple focus points. I think we used our Searing Restoration that the Inventor has, and the Cleric went through their heal spells, and it still wasn't enough.
Oh man.
Yeah.
But I am truly sorry to hear about that sorcerer's death, but it also helps highlight some of the power and potency behind some of those abilities. So there are still things to learn.
It gives you respect for the system, for sure.
And if it makes you feel better, while those creatures didn't kill any of my players, it is only because my players ended up handing away a treasure that they were protecting that the monsters were after.
Oh, okay.
So
see, that's interesting. I feel like I don't see enough of that in an actual play podcast and in my own gameplay. I don't see enough encounters that end in anything other than one side has killed the other side. And I think that's that's a very exciting option to say, you know what, this isn't worth our lives. We're giving something up to have an enemy do the same. I mean, there was a side quest, or not, I guess it wasn't a side quest. My GM was out either sick or on paternity leave, so I was guest GMing a few. And he was kind of shadowing, and we decided, you know what, this character will surrender if it gets down to hit points. That character reached to that level, and I was going to have him surrender on his turn. And I think we were one character away, and it was the gunslinger.
Oh,
and
no.
I was like, I'm going to let this happen and just see what happens. And I sort of already decided in my mind that I was going to not totally fudge an outcome, but I was like, even if this is technically a killing blow, I might not make it a killing blow just to let the character surrender. And then our gunslinger critted nat 20. So I said, okay, this is what happened. The guy, it was a cactus Leshy. He stands up with his little like Leshy voice and says, "Give up, I give up." And the gunslinger just goes, boom, just blasts them away. I thought, that's clear. Let the dice tell the story for you at that point. That's what happened.
I have seen a few. I'm not even sure the right word. Gunslinger crits are a creature of their own in this game.
Do you want to see enough damage to kill 4 of the things like to kill something 4 times over? Like, it's just wild sometimes.
Awesome. All right, we ready for my next story?
I think so.
All right. So this story actually happened just a little over a month ago in my current game. And some of the consequences of this are actually still playing out at my table. I call this story the Mead Hall Brawl. And in this particular story, I'll give you the lesson of the story before I give you the actual story itself. The lesson of the story is don't get so stuck in your idea of what a good scene is that you forget that your players have their own idea of what a good scene is. Because this was an example of everything I had planned went wrong, and my players were having a grand time of it, and I was just stressing out behind the screen. So the setup for this, there are some peace talks that are occurring between two major factions in my campaign, and my characters are representatives from one side or another who are at these peace talks trying to make sure that everything goes according to plan. As a result of some of their adventures and investigations, they have found what are termed in my game as Fey humors, which is Fey alchemical creations that don't register as magic.
Okay.
And as such, they're easier to smuggle, and the particular thing that the Fey use this for is to unleash emotion effects on an area. And I'm sure you can imagine
I'm seeing where this is going.
in tense peace talks, you can understand how the ability to just suddenly dump a bunch of emotion on an area without warning could be a bad thing. So they are investigating, following leads, trying to figure out where all this stuff could be, and they get a lead that's taking them to a particular mead hall where the warriors from one side frequently gather to drink. And they walk in, and I end one session on this very dramatic cliffhanger as they walk in and they see one of these humors sitting in the middle of a thing of ice in the middle of a bunch of kegs of ale. And the bartender sees them come in, knows what they're up to, and unleashes some of these humors and tells the people who are drinking in this mead hall to get them. Okay? And the session ends on just a whole bunch of Vikings standing up, ready to fight, not sure why they're ready to fight. Alright? Lead into the next session. The main bartender, the way this was supposed to go, the main bartender and two of his allies are among the people who are spreading these humors around. The main bartender is a wizard. He is supposed to throw out a grease, maybe some other area spell, cast invisibility, run out the door. Then his two allies who are helping to work the bar are supposed to whip these Vikings up into a frenzy, and the party is supposed to shove or knock unconscious the Vikings, get to the bartenders, take them out, and then get the information that they need to find and catch the wizard. Okay? None of this happened according to plan.
Why would it?
First, my group adamantly refused to engage any of the Vikings who are trying to fight them. Just flat out refuse. Which, on one hand, is understandable. They know that these people are being manipulated. But they're not even trying to use non-lethal tactics. They're not trying to grapple or trip. They're just like, we are going to ignore this and do other things. Which leads to hundreds of different complications. Two of my players decide that the clear and obvious target is the wizard who has cast invisibility on himself, and they ignore everything else in the scene, and they are just trying to catch the invisible wizard, who should be able to escape anyways if I could have rolled above a 3. He is tripping, he is falling, he is getting knocked over. Like, this wizard who is supposed to escape the scene by the 3rd round cannot get away from the bar for all of the bad rolls that I had with him. Alright? And then, my wife is one of my players. She badly misunderstands the description of this humor stone that I've described. I intended to describe it as a fairly, beyond the scope of what you could see in this, in my screen right now, this very large item that is like slowly leaking emotions into the air. Okay, my wife decides that it must be about this big.
It's a golf ball.
Yeah. So her plan to diffuse this whole situation is she is going to run over and try to grab this thing and pick it up and like chuck it out the window or something like that. And I tried to explain, and she doesn't understand the corrections, and so she's over here trying to lift this massive thing up off of the counter, and doesn't understand why she's failing the rolls until finally the table tips over and it shatters, and now you have pieces of stone that are getting kicked all around the room.
Oh no.
And spreading this, what is essentially emotion gas, around the room faster. And so I end up with essentially 3 different scenes going on that I did not intend. Because I have angry Vikings that are being ignored. I have
Which probably makes them angrier.
Yes. I have a wizard who cannot escape, and the party did catch him, by the way. So my party basically skipped 2 entire sessions worth of content that I was going to run. No stress there. Thank you, guys. And then you have the scene of several of my players scrambling after these stones while the other 2 bartenders, who are supposed to be the core of the fight, are beating them up because they're too focused on the stones. What should have been a 30-minute, 45-minute scene took 3.5 hours to run. It was such a chaotic mess. And
this makes me remember something that was said in one of our last sessions. There's no beating a game like Pathfinder. There's no objective other than making your GM rub their temples and go, "What are you doing?
Yes.
What are you guys doing?"
So, for that entire 3.5 hours, I'm behind the scenes. I'm like, nothing's going according to plan. I'm having to invent rulings off the cuff. I am stressed out to no end. And finally, the fight scene ends, and I call the game for the night, and I'm packing my stuff up, and I realize my players are standing around the room, and they are just laughing their tails off. They are carrying on about everything that's happened in the scene. And it occurred to me that the entire time I was stressing out because it was going wrong, it was actually going right because my players were having a good time with it. So that's the lesson.
That is a great lesson out of that. It's not scripted content that has to go according to plan in order to be enjoyable or correct. It's I really do think, like, ultimately the only rule in this game is have fun, right? Mm-hmm. So if that was achieved, even if it didn't go as you thought, power to your players. It sounds delightful. I only hope that someone was playing a goblin character in there who could have been dancing on top of the table, playing with fire during it, or just sounds delightfully chaotic, which is
we do not
always
have
fun.
We do not have a goblin, but we do have a Russian. So
okay,
we're playing in Irison right now. And and canonically, there are characters in Irison who are from Russia on actual Earth. So one of my players is playing a Russian. So
I did not know that. Wow. Okay. Well, that is something. That also makes me think maybe I'll have to open up a carnival game or a booth at the Renaissance Fair called Catch the Invisible Wizard. And since all those games are scams, this is just going to be a dirt pen with nothing in it. And I'll let people pay $5 to run around for 30 seconds, and they'll say, "I didn't catch him." I'll be like, better luck next time. He's invisible. That's tough. It's tough to catch the invisible wizard. Just let people grab at nothing in a pit for $5.
I love it. All right. So bring us home with your final what went wrong story.
Okay. So my final what went wrong is supposed to have been a maybe not trivial, but a minor, maybe moderate encounter against a very common type of enemy in the system, a swarm. No one likes swarms, but you are going to fight them. There are swarms in every campaign. It's a very common thing. So we're going up against the wasp swarm, and we should have known better and should have been able to do better. And just as a reminder, these are things that the players knew, but the characters didn't know at the time. Swarms often have, I think maybe always have, resistance to physical damage. Depends a little bit depending on the type of swarm. They're going to be immune to mental damage, to precision damage, and they're going to be weak to area of effect and splash damage. So keep that in mind when we didn't want to cheat as characters and lean into that, or as players and lean into that, so we were going to recall knowledge. In a party of seven, including a rogue, who should be a skills monkey, no one was trained in nature. We could not recall knowledge on a swarm out of 7 people. We had so many overlapping skills. So that was not a great start. And then we had our swashbuckler and our rogue attempting to do damage with their needly pointy little rapiers that do extra precision damage under right scenarios, and that wasn't working. And then our gunslinger is our primary backline fighter, and firearms, when they crit, do a lot of damage, but if they don't crit, they have pretty low weapon rolls, and when something has a resistance to physical damage, sure, the gunslinger would hit, do no damage. Hit again, do no damage. And then we started getting caught by the swarm, getting attacked, getting poisoned. Characters are going down while they're taking persistent poison damage, which accelerates the dying process. I mean, and they're still on the ground. The swarm takes up 4 squares of the map. So you're on the ground, dying with poison damage, and then you get attacked again. So characters were just rapidly going from, oh, I'm unconscious, to I'm at dying 3 already. One more thing and I'm done. We really were only saved by a new session and a new round of hero points. We play with rules as written hero points, where you start every session with a hero point. And we were only saved because it was getting very late in the night and our GM saw it was going poorly, and it was kind of like, okay, we're going to call it, and you can come back in 2 weeks and you can finish this up, and you can just use your hero point right at the start of the session to not die. So we did. No one died, but it was honestly, it was almost embarrassing because it should not have been that difficult of an encounter. So what I got out of that, cover the skills. If you have a party of 7 and you have a rogue and an inventor in there, you've got, rogue with other skill training, inventor being an intelligence-based class, so they have lots of skills. Someone should have been trained in nature to figure some of this stuff out. Another thing is, I really advocate for having at least one heavy hitter in a party to not care if there's a resistance. A barbarian doesn't care if you have resistance 3. A thaumaturge doesn't care. They're just they'll make up a weakness on you and they'll hurt you anyway. And then, you don't necessarily have to have a heavy hitter, but when you do look at what your martial characters are offering, you should offer more than one type of physical damage and one type of bonus damage. We had piercing, precision damage. That was it. We don't have, I guess I should take that back. The inventor doesn't do precision damage. So that was some extra damage that would help and get through. But yeah, you really need to make sure as an individual player, if you're a martial, it is not a bad idea to carry your sword, but keep a hammer in your back pocket. And if your buddy has a rapier, maybe put your rapier down and grab an axe instead. So we made it through, but it was our GM could have TPK'd us, and if the session had gone on for another 5 minutes and said, no, you're not going to be saved by your hero points. You guys are going down.
This is a system where versatility is important. And I think a lot of people who come to Pathfinder 2e don't realize how powerful versatility is until they've had a few experiences in this game.
On the note of versatility, I always encourage every party to have one ranged specialist. That can be a spellcaster or it can be a ranged martial, and to also have, a fighter or someone, or just someone who has a hand crossbow in their back pocket, because you can absolutely have your way with any enemy, just not even worry about most encounters. If you've got like a barbarian and fighter up front and you're just swinging D12 great axes, one flying creature later.
Yes.
One like, character level -2 even flying creature, and you are swinging at nothing as a, a phantom bird or whatever it happens to be is swooping down, attacking you, and then flying away and just pecking you to death while you can do nothing about it. So yeah, versatility is really important to have in your party.
And you didn't really focus in on this, but one portion of your story reminded me of the first player character death that happened in Pathfinder 2e for me. And that is with these two little terrible words, persistent damage.
Yes, it's awful.
Being unconscious with persistent damage killed my wife's first character in Pathfinder 2e.
It is, I think that is the most dangerous thing as a player. If you are the effect of, it's usually poison, but it can also be an elemental spell or effect where you are, you're on fire. You have persistent fire damage. Wow, is that rough?
Hers was bleed.
Bleed, yeah, that'll do it too.
She had persistent bleed, and the really sad thing for her was the party kept healing her, but they never took care of the condition that was causing her to bleed. So she was like down, wounded, dead.
Yeah. It's brutal. All right, well, that was fun.
Yep. So that was just some examples from Rebel and I of things that we have learned from storytelling in Pathfinder 2e. And that's one of the great things about gaming. As you play, you make mistakes, you run into crazy situations like these, and you learn lessons that you get to carry forward. However, it's not just the sessions that are rough that can teach you lessons. There are also the stories where things go right and go really right, and that's the other side of this conversation. So the same day that this video is going live on my channel, I'm also going to be over on Rebel's channel, and we're going to have the second half of this conversation where we're talking about what went right at our gaming table. So I strongly encourage you, when this video is over, go check out Rebel's channel and check out that video. And that's a perfect segue into Rebel. Tell us about your channel and tell us where they can find you.
Will do. I'm RebelThenKing. You can find me at RebelThenKing on YouTube, and as Mark already said, I'm going to have the companion piece to this. So if you remember my first story of what went wrong about the terrible undead mummies or mummy priests, I'm actually going to talk about how we did turn that encounter around. So if you want to hear how that one in particular, as well as some other stories of things that went right, hop on over to my channel, where we discuss the lighter side, where you aren't feeling like just a little peasant who got their dreams crushed by a giant dragon, but you're feeling like the good and proper hero that you want to be. That's the reason we play these games.
So with all that out of the way, the time has come to turn the conversation over to you, the audience. Jump down to the comments section, Let us know your stories where things went wrong at your gaming table and what lessons you learned from those experiences. And then, as we mentioned, head over to Rebel Than King's channel, check out the second part of this conversation, and join in with your tales over there as well. And as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation. Have a wonderful day.
Bye, y'all.